In the fall of 1998, an entire village in northern Appalachia ceased to exist. 22 people, men, women, and children, gone without a trace. Their dinners were still warm on the tables. Radios were still playing. The dogs were left unfed. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just silence. Tonight we revisit Hollow Creek, the American village that vanished. If you're drawn to stories of the unsolved, the uncanny, and the unforgettable, subscribe. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Sheriff Alan Reeves received the call. It was October 18th, 1998, a Sunday evening in Ashe County, North Carolina. Reeves had just finished his supper when the dispatcher patched through a message from a nearby village called Hollow Creek. A neighbor from outside town had driven in earlier that day looking for a friend. He said the village looked wrong. Empty. Reeves didn't think much of it at first. Power outages were common during storms, and rural folks tended to keep to themselves. But then came the second call, then the third. By 9 p.m., Reeves and 2 deputies were driving the winding mountain road toward Hollow Creek, their cruiser tires slipping on the wet asphalt. When they arrived, their headlights swept over silent houses, their windows glowing faintly. Front doors stood ajar. Curtains fluttered in the breeze. It wasn't until Reeves stepped into the first home that he understood the scope of what they were seeing. Plates of food sat half-finished on the table. A television hummed softly, playing a Sunday night football game. A coat still dripped rainwater by the door, but no people, not one. By dawn, it was confirmed. Every single one of Hollow Creek's 22 residents had vanished, and nothing would ever be the same again. The investigation began before the sun had burned the mist off the hollows. Sheriff Reeves stood on the main street of Hollow Creek, staring at the pale outlines of mountains beyond. His deputies moved like uncertain shadows between houses, their flashlights cutting through fog. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, not because he needed one, but because silence demanded it. He would later recall that morning as the loudest quiet he had ever heard. The houses stood like open mouths, waiting to tell their stories. Reeves chose the McClary residence first. James and Marlene McClary, a couple in their late 40s, lived at the end of Willow Lane with their teenage son. Inside, the scene was almost painfully ordinary. A pot roast cooling on the counter, a half-finished game of cards on the kitchen table. A glass had tipped over, spilling water onto a stack of mail, the ink bleeding. Reeves moved from room to room, beds unmade, clothes laid out for morning, a single lamp still burning in the den. No sign of struggle. The dog, a black and white collie named Jasper, lay in the backyard, whining softly. Starving, but alive. It wasn't until Reeves checked the back porch that something unsettled him. On the railing, lined up with deliberate neatness, were 3 pairs of shoes. Men's boots, women's flats, a boy's sneakers, all placed side by side, soles pointing outward. He called for Deputy Latham. The younger man joined him, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. "Why'd they leave their shoes?" Latham whispered. Reeves didn't answer. The next house told the same story, then the next. By mid-morning, they had entered nearly a dozen homes. In every one, the same details repeated. Meals left unfinished, radios playing, shoes set neatly by the doors or porches. In the Winters home, a bowl of cereal had turned soggy in its milk. In the Elder house, a baby's crib stood empty, mobile still turning above it. Reeves gathered his deputies outside the abandoned general store. "No sign of foul play," he said, voice low. "No forced entries. No blood. No. Nothing." "Where the hell did they go?" Latham asked. Reeves didn't answer that either. He couldn't. By noon, state police had been called. By evening, the FBI. And soon, Hollow Creek was no longer a forgotten speck on the map, but the epicenter of a mystery that would haunt the nation. The FBI arrived in convoy. Black SUVs, men in suits stepping into the mud with measured efficiency. Special Agent Dana Crowell introduced herself, a tall woman with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. "Sheriff Reeves," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "You've secured the scene?" "As best we can," Reeves replied. "But the whole village is a scene." Crowell glanced around at the clustered houses, the fog still clinging to the mountainside. "Then we'll start house by house." That night, floodlights bathed Hollow Creek in harsh white glow. Dozens of investigators moved in and out of homes, bagging half-eaten meals, fingerprints, scraps of clothing. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters searched the woods. Nothing. No tracks in the mud leading out of the village. No vehicles missing. No phone calls, no notes, no explanations. Just absence. By the third day, the press descended. Satellite trucks lined the mountain road. Reporters shoved microphones at anyone willing to speak. "Where did they go?" one asked. Sheriff Reeves stared at the cameras, his cigarette burning down to the filter. "If I knew," he said flatly, "we wouldn't be standing here." But inside, he was haunted. Because late that second night, walking past the Hollow Creek church, he thought he'd heard something carried on the wind. Children's laughter, soft, distant, coming from the woods. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the hollow as if unwilling to reveal its secrets. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights cutting across the ridge lines. But from the ground, Hollow Creek still looked eerily ordinary. Houses waiting for occupants who would never return. Sheriff Reeves hadn't slept. He sat on the hood of his cruiser, coffee going cold in his hand, watching the FBI agents fan out. It was the third day since the call, and still not one clue had emerged. Not a footprint, not a drop of blood, not even a single credible witness. He ground his cigarette into the gravel and forced himself to stand when Special Agent Crowell approached. She looked impossibly awake for someone who had also been working round the clock. "Sheriff," she said, "we've gone through 12 houses so far. The details are consistent." Reeves nodded. Shoes lined up, meals left out, radios on and not a sign of where they went. Crowell's tone was neutral, but Reeves could see the tightness around her mouth. Even seasoned agents were unnerved. "What's your theory?" Reeves asked. She glanced at the row of houses, her gaze sharp but unreadable. "Right now, my job is to collect evidence, not form theories." "That's convenient," Reeves muttered. She shot him a look, but let it pass. By noon, the search expanded beyond the village. Teams of dogs combed the woods, handlers calling into the mist. State troopers walked shoulder to shoulder through fields, marking grids with fluorescent tape. The creek that gave Hollow Creek its name was dragged, its black waters swirling under floodlights. Nothing. The press called it the Vanishing Village. Reporters speculated wildly. Cults, alien abduction, chemical leaks, mass suicide. Every network wanted footage of the empty homes, the half-finished meals, the silent streets. Inside one house, a cameraman whispered to his producer, "It looks staged." Like someone meant for us to find it this way, Reeves overheard. He said nothing, but the idea gnawed at him. That night, the FBI set up a temporary command post inside the village church. The pews were pushed aside to make room for maps, radios, and stacks of evidence bags. Floodlights outside turned the stained glass into glowing panes of red and blue. Reeves wandered in late, the smell of damp wood mixing with coffee and sweat. He lingered near the back, watching the agents debate. Crowell stood at the front, pointing to a map of the county. There are no recent missing persons reports from outside Hollow Creek. No indication of mass travel. Phones were left behind. Vehicles, too. The disappearance was contained. That's the strangest part. "Could they have walked out?" an agent asked. "Through miles of mud and woods without leaving tracks?" "All 22 of them." Murmurs rippled through the room. Reeves shifted uncomfortably. He thought again of the sound he'd heard. The laughter outside the church on that first night. He had told no one. Not yet. When the meeting broke, Crowell caught him by the door. "You look like you want to say something." Reeves hesitated. "I don't have proof." "Proof comes later." "What is it?" He lowered his voice. "The first night I thought I heard children." Outside, near the woods. Her expression didn't change, and that was before I knew all the kids were gone. For the first time, Crowell looked unsettled. "Sheriff," she said quietly, "you'll need to write that down." The following morning, the search shifted focus. Instead of looking for the missing, agents looked for patterns. One by one, they built profiles of the 22 residents. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, children. Nothing to connect them except geography. No criminal records, no debts, no history of violence. But Reeves knew better than to believe in ordinary. In small towns, secrets were buried deep. And Hollow Creek had been burying things for a long time. At dusk, he drove the back road toward Miller's Hill, where an old neighbor lived outside the village proper. Samuel Raines was in his 70s, wiry with a tobacco-stained beard. He leaned on his porch rail as Reeves pulled up. "Sheriff," Raines said, squinting into the fading light. "I was wondering when you'd come." Reeves climbed the steps. "You called in that first night." "Had to," Raines said. "Went down to see my cousin, and the place was empty. I knew it weren't right." "You seen anything unusual before that? Strange folks coming through, lights at night?" Raines spat tobacco juice into a can. "Nothing I ain't seen before, but..." He paused. "There's always been talk. About Hollow Creek." "What kind of talk?" Raines shifted uncomfortably. "Old stories. Folks disappearing in them woods long before the village was built. My granddaddy used to say Hollow Creek was cursed ground. That's why people kept their houses tight to the road, away from the trees." Reeves frowned. "And you believe that?" "I believe 22 people vanished without a damn trace," Raines said, voice hard. "And you won't find them unless you ask the right questions." "What questions?" Raines leaned closer, his eyes pale in the dusk. "Ask what Hollow Creek was hiding. Ask who wanted it kept quiet." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of leaves rustling in the dark woods beyond. Reeves turned his head, scanning the tree line. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a pale flicker between the trunks. But when he blinked, it was gone. When he looked back, Raines had gone inside, leaving Reeves alone on the porch with the echo of his words. Driving back, Reeves gripped the wheel tight. He had spent his career laughing off talk of curses and ghost stories. But Hollow Creek was testing him in ways he hadn't imagined. Back in town, floodlights burned against the fog. FBI agents moved in and out of houses like restless ghosts. And somewhere in the woods beyond the village, a sound carried faintly on the wind. Children's laughter. Again. Reeves stopped in his tracks. His heart hammered. This time, he wasn't the only one who heard it. 2 deputies near the tape froze, their flashlights trembling. One whispered, "Sheriff, tell me you hear that too." Reeves swallowed hard. He nodded once. The sound faded, swallowed by the trees. For the first time since Hollow Creek vanished, Reeves felt certain of one thing. They weren't just searching for missing people. Something was watching them. The command post buzzed like a hive the next morning. Maps spread across folding tables, red pins marking each home. Photographs of the missing were taped to a corkboard. Faces staring blankly out, their smiles frozen in time. Agent Crowell stood at the center, giving orders. She had that sharp tone Reeves recognized, the voice of someone trying to anchor chaos with structure. "Every item bagged and cataloged by 1800 hours," she said. "I don't care if it's a spoon or a sock. If it's out of place, it gets logged." Agents moved briskly, carrying stacks of evidence bags. A few reporters tried to peek through the church windows before state troopers chased them off. Reeves lingered near the back, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. He had been in law enforcement for 25 years. He had seen drownings, car wrecks, suicides, the messy ends of ordinary lives. But he had never seen a case where nothing made sense. Crowell noticed him and beckoned. "Sheriff, walk with me." They stepped outside. The mist had thinned, revealing the ridges beyond. The houses looked deceptively peaceful in daylight, their windows bright, porches tidy. "We found something in the elder house," Crowell said. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Go on." She handed him a sealed evidence bag. Inside lay a child's drawing, crayon on yellow paper. It showed a row of stick figures holding hands, standing at the edge of a forest. Above them, in jagged black strokes, loomed a taller figure with no face. The hairs on Reeves's arms prickled. "Which kid drew this?" "Belonged to the elder boy, age 7. His mother kept his schoolwork in a box under the bed. This one was set apart. Different paper, different style. We think it was drawn recently." Reeves studied the faceless figure. The proportions were wrong, too tall, arms too long. "And nobody mentioned this before?" Crowell's expression hardened. It wasn't in the initial household inventory. Somebody put it there, or left it there. Reeves exhaled smoke. "So, either the boy drew something he saw, or someone wanted us to see it." Crowell didn't answer. She didn't have to. By noon, forensic teams had processed most of the homes. They found fingerprints, all belonging to residents. DNA samples, hair, skin flakes, confirmed the families had lived there until the night they disappeared. But nothing foreign. No unknown prints, no outsiders. It was as if Hollow Creek had swallowed itself whole. Deputy Latham joined Reeves on the street, face pale. "Sheriff, you ought to see this." They walked to the Winters home. Inside, an evidence tech pointed to the dining room wall. Beneath the wallpaper, faint markings had been carved into the plaster. Reeves leaned close. Words, scratched with something sharp. "We fed him." Crowell appeared beside him, lips pressed tight. "We'll get it analyzed." Reeves stared at the words until his vision blurred. Fed him. The house was empty, the table still set for dinner. And someone had written a message that sounded like ritual, not accident. "Who the hell is him?" Reeves asked. Nobody answered. That evening, the FBI brought in families of the missing to interview. The small community hall outside town filled with anxious relatives, parents, siblings, cousins. Their voices echoed off the wood-paneled walls, a mix of anger and grief. Reeves sat in on the sessions. One by one, families recounted the last phone calls, the last visits. None described fear, none reported conflict. "They were normal," said one woman, wringing her hands. "James called me about fixing his roof. Nothing unusual. My sister was planning the school fundraiser," said another. "She had lists written out." People don't just walk away from that. Crowell asked careful questions, her tone steady. "Any unusual visitors in town? Outsiders?" Heads shook. No strangers, no travelers. Hollow Creek had been insular. That was part of its identity. Reeves noted the patterns. Everyone agreed on one thing. The villagers had been preparing for an ordinary week. And then, they were gone. After the sessions, Reeves drove back through Hollow Creek alone. Night pressed heavy over the hills. The floodlights had been dimmed, the FBI working skeleton crews. The houses glowed faintly, windows catching moonlight. He parked by the church and sat in silence. His father had always said the mountains held secrets older than people. Reeves used to laugh at that. Tonight, he wasn't laughing. He stepped out, gravel crunching under his boots, and walked toward the woods. The trees loomed black and still. Halfway down the slope, he froze. A figure stood between the trees, tall, motionless, watching. Reeves's breath caught. He reached for his flashlight, snapped it on. The beam hit only branches. No figure. He stood for a long moment, heart hammering before turning back. His boots squelched in mud, but another sound threaded the silence. Laughter, soft, high-pitched, like children at play. It came from deeper in the woods. Reeves gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to follow. His deputy had heard it too the night before. He wasn't losing his mind, but he was starting to believe something no training manual could prepare him for. Hollow Creek hadn't just lost 22 souls. Something had taken them. The rain finally broke on the 5th day. Sunlight cut through the clouds, sharp and indifferent, revealing Hollow Creek in its full desolation. 22 houses, all neatly kept, all abandoned. The village looked alive only from a distance. Up close, it was a stage with no actors. Special Agent Crowell had called a briefing. Reeves sat at the back of the church-turned command post, his hat low over his eyes. The air was stale with sweat and damp clothing. Crowell pointed to photographs pinned across the corkboard. "We've found no physical evidence of mass departure. No tire tracks, no footprints beyond the residence. But we did uncover something in the county records." She tapped an old black and white photo. Hollow Creek, circa 1920. The church stood at the center, smaller but recognizable. Rows of simple wooden homes flanked the dirt road. "This wasn't the first time people disappeared here," Crowell said. The room hushed. County records show Hollow Creek was built on the site of an older settlement, Miller's Crossing. In 1919, that community suffered a mass disappearance of 14 people. Local authorities at the time called it a flu epidemic, but no bodies were ever reported. The town was resettled a decade later under a new name. Reeves shifted uncomfortably. His father had told him stories about Miller's Crossing, but he'd always assumed they were backwoods folklore. Crowell's gaze swept the room. This isn't just a missing persons case. It may be part of a historical pattern. Later, Reeves stood outside smoking while agents filed past. Deputy Latham joined him, his face pale. "You believe that?" Latham asked quietly. "That it happened before." Reeves exhaled smoke. "I believe the ground remembers things we don't want it to." They both turned toward the woods. Sunlight filtered through the trees in fractured shafts. The silence pressed down, heavier than it should have been. That afternoon, forensic teams expanded the search radius. Ground-penetrating radar swept the cemetery behind the church. The machine beeped steadily as it rolled over the soil. A technician waved Crowell over. "Ma'am, we've got anomalies, large voids beneath the earth." Reeves joined them. They knelt at one of the graves. The headstone read, "Eleanor McClary, 1898 to 1919. "Void beneath," the technician confirmed, "but shallow." "Not a coffin." They dug carefully. After 2 feet, the shovel hit something hard. Reeves crouched as soil fell away, revealing a crude wooden box no larger than a child's toy chest. Inside lay a bundle of bones. Small, fragile. Not one skeleton, but many fragments mixed together. Reeves felt his stomach turn. "These aren't from 1919, Crowell said grimly. "Some are recent." The cemetery became a crime scene within the hour. Multiple shallow boxes were unearthed, each containing bones, human, animal, indistinguishable in places. Some showed cut marks, others were charred. One skull, small as a grapefruit, bore deliberate carvings across the crown. Reeves stared at it, his throat dry. He couldn't decipher the symbols, but they felt old. Older than the town itself. That evening the press swarmed when word leaked. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing. Is this a ritual site? Were the villagers part of a cult? Are the missing presumed dead? Crowell pushed through without comment, but Reeves caught a reporter's words lingering in the air. They fed him. The phrase carved into the winter's wall, the phrase now on every reporter's lips. Inside the church, tension simmered. Agents whispered of cults, of sacrifices. Reeves sat with Latham near the back. "You hear it last night?" Latham asked. "Hear what?" "The laughter." Reeves' chest tightened. He had hoped the others hadn't noticed. "Yeah." Latham's eyes darted to the windows. "Sheriff, it wasn't just kids. I heard a man too. Deep voice. Like he was calling them." Reeves didn't answer. He couldn't. Because last night, lying awake in his office, he thought he'd heard the same thing. Children laughing, yes, but woven through it a voice, low and commanding, speaking words he couldn't understand. Just after midnight, a scream shattered the uneasy calm. Reeves bolted upright and ran outside with his deputies. One of the FBI agents was stumbling out of the Winters house, eyes wide, flashlight shaking in his hand. "What happened?" Crowell demanded. The agent's face was white. I saw someone inside, a man, standing in the hallway. They swept the house with floodlights. Every room empty. Dust settled in the beams. "You sure it wasn't another agent?" Crowell pressed. The young man shook his head violently. "He was tall. Too tall. His face was—" He broke off, trembling. "I don't want to say." Crowell dismissed him to rest, but Reeves caught the way the other agents exchanged glances. The village was working on them, eroding their nerves. Back inside, Reeves sat alone in the Winters dining room, staring at the words carved beneath the wallpaper. "We fed him." His cigarette ash trembled. What if the villagers hadn't been taken? What if they'd gone willingly? The Hollow Creek courthouse hadn't been used in years. Dust coated the floor like snowdrifts. Shelves sagged under the weight of decaying ledgers and brittle maps. The county clerk had unlocked the doors reluctantly, muttering that nothing useful would be inside. Crowell wasn't convinced. She moved through the dim records room with measured steps, flashlight beam dancing across boxes. Reeves followed, though every part of him wanted to be back outside. "This is where it starts," Crowell said. "Not the graves. Not the houses. Here, in the paper trail." They opened a box marked 1920, Miller's Crossing. Inside, files detailed the disappearance of 14 residents. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. The ink faded to sepia. Reeves read aloud, "Cause of death, influenza." He snorted. Not a single body was ever recovered. Crowell leaned closer. "Look here." She pointed to a note scrawled at the bottom of a page. "Recommendation. Site unsuitable for habitation due to recurring disturbances." "Disturbances?" Reeves echoed. Crowell pulled another folder. "Reports from surveyors in 1930, when Hollow Creek was established." Pages described complaints of voices in the woods, livestock mutilated, families moving away after hearing children singing at night. And then, in 1936, an entry that froze them both. Complaint filed by Eleanor Barrett. Entire family missing. House abandoned. Neighbors claim they were taken in the night. Reeves whispered the words again. Taken in the night. His hands trembled despite himself. Back in the present, the courthouse clock struck noon, startling him. He realized he'd been standing in the same place for nearly an hour, staring at the pages. Crowell stacked documents methodically. "We need to scan these. This is bigger than a cold case. This looks generational." Reeves tried to focus, but a noise tugged at him. A faint tapping, rhythmic, from the far wall of the records room. He turned his head slowly. The wall was lined with old cabinets. One drawer, second from the bottom, rattled ever so slightly. Reeves walked toward it, every step heavy. He pulled the drawer open. Empty. But the tapping didn't stop. It came now from behind the cabinet, deeper in the wall. "Sheriff?" Crowell's voice was sharp, pulling him back. The tapping ceased instantly, like it had been listening. Reeves forced a nod. Nothing. Rats. Maybe Crowell eyed him carefully, then went back to her files. Reeves kept his back to the wall for the rest of the search. That night, the command post buzzed with grim energy. Agents scanned the old records, piecing together a timeline of disappearances stretching back a century. Every 20 to 30 years, one of them reported, there's a cluster. Families vanish, livestock vanish, then silence until the next cycle. Crowell drew a line across the whiteboard. We're not just investigating a crime scene, we're looking at a pattern. The disappearances in Hollow Creek are ritualized. A heavy silence filled the room. Reeves lit a cigarette, though he hadn't smoked inside since the FBI arrived. He felt eyes on him, not from the agents, but from the shadows beyond the windows. When he exhaled, the smoke seemed to linger longer than it should, curling into shapes that almost looked like faces. He crushed the cigarette out too quickly, his fingers shaking. Just past midnight, Reeves woke in his office chair, throat dry. The church was silent, but for the ticking of the wall clock. He sat up, uneasy. The air smelled faintly of earth, damp soil, like a graveyard after rain. From the corner of the room came a sound, children whispering. Reeves froze, heart hammering. The whispers grew clearer. A dozen voices overlapping, chanting in a soft, sing-song tone. Feed him, feed him, feed him. Reeves stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. The whispers stopped. He searched the room, flashlight beam cutting across empty pews, pale walls, the board covered in case files. Nothing. But when he turned back toward his desk, the files had shifted. The top folder lay open, though he hadn't touched it. On the page, in bold black marker that hadn't been there before, was a single phrase: "Do not resist." Reeves staggered back, breath caught in his throat. He slammed the folder shut, but the words were burned into his mind. By morning, Reeves told no one. Crowell was sharp. She'd see through any excuse. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the village alone, boots crunching on gravel. At the edge of the woods, he stopped. The trees leaned together like conspirators, shadows thick even in daylight. And faintly, almost like the echo of a dream, he thought he heard the laughter again. Reeves whispered to himself, voice hoarse, "What the hell are you feeding?" The forest gave no answer, but he had the distinct, suffocating sense that it was listening. The morning fog rolled off Hollow Creek like a shroud, settling low in the valley. The agents were already in the cemetery when Reeves arrived, their shovels cutting into the damp earth with dull thuds. Crowell stood at the edge of a newly opened grave, her jaw tight. "Another cache," she told him. Reeves leaned over. The pit revealed another crude wooden box. Inside lay bones, human again. This time, arranged carefully in a circle, as though posed. In the center of the circle, wrapped in oilcloth, was a rusted knife. A forensic tech muttered, "That blade's old." Real old Reeves stared at the weapon, a sickness rising in his gut. The handle was carved with symbols, crude spirals and lines. He didn't recognize them, but they seemed familiar in a way that disturbed him. Crowell ordered the evidence bagged, but Reeves's gaze clung to it, unwilling to look away. By afternoon, the agents had unearthed 5 such boxes. Some contained bones, others contained objects. A cracked porcelain doll's head, a bird's skull wrapped in string, a child's shoe with nails driven through the sole. Each discovery turned the mood darker. The younger agents whispered. Latham wouldn't stop crossing himself. Reeves tried to stay steady, but every item felt like a message, a warning left behind by people who knew what was coming. When he closed his eyes, he could almost hear them whispering beneath the soil. That night, Reeves didn't sleep. He sat in his office with the knife from the morning sealed in an evidence bag on the desk. The carvings seemed to pulse in the lamplight, lines shifting when he wasn't looking. He opened a bottle of whiskey he'd sworn off years ago and drank until his hands stopped trembling. But the whispers came anyway. "Sheriff." The voice was low, drawn out, almost mocking. Reeves froze. The church was empty, yet the voice seemed to seep from the walls themselves. "Sheriff? Don't resist!" Reeves gripped the whiskey bottle like a weapon. "Who's there?" The silence that followed was worse than an answer. In the early hours, he dreamed. He stood in the village square, the houses alive with light. Shadows moved inside, men, women, children. Laughter drifted on the air. Then, one by one, the lights snuffed out. The doors opened. The villagers walked silently into the street, all 22 of them. Their eyes glowed faintly, pale as milk. At the front was a man Reeves recognized instantly. Thomas Winters, the carpenter. Winters raised a finger and pointed at Reeves. The voices of the villagers rose together, chanting in perfect unison, "Feed him! Feed him! Feed him!" Reeves tried to run, but his legs locked. The chant grew louder until it shook the ground. The villagers advanced, and behind them, something larger moved. A shape in the darkness, towering with too many limbs. Reeves woke screaming, the sound echoing off the church rafters. He stumbled outside into the night air, chest heaving. The stars glared down, sharp and merciless. Latham found him crouched on the steps, drenched in sweat. "Sheriff?" Reeves wiped his face quickly, trying to disguise his terror. "Bad dream." Latham studied him. "You look like hell. You're hearing it too, aren't you?" Reeves didn't answer. "Voices in the night," Latham whispered. "Kids laughing. Men calling. I hear it every time I close my eyes." Reeves lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "Keep that to yourself, deputy. Last thing we need is panic." But inside, he knew panic was already spreading. Through the agents, through the town, through his own mind. At dawn, Crowell convened another briefing. Reeves forced himself upright, though his skull pounded. Crowell's voice was clipped, businesslike, but her eyes betrayed unease. "The artifacts and bones point to a ritual pattern. This isn't random disposal. It's deliberate, symbolic. The question is, were the villagers performing the rituals, or victims of them?" She laid a photo on the table. The rusted knife. "This symbol repeats on every artifact," she continued, tracing the spiral with her pen. "It matches a carving found in a 1919 ledger from Miller's Crossing. We're bringing in an anthropologist to analyze it, but I suspect we're looking at continuity. Something practiced here for a very long time." Reeves stared at the photo. In the spiral, he thought he saw movement, like it was drawing him inward, down into something bottomless. He blinked hard. The symbol was still, but he couldn't shake the sense it was watching him back. The tree line loomed at the village's edge, a wall of cedar and oak tangled with undergrowth. Morning light barely penetrated the canopy. Crowell had ordered a full sweep. Dozens of agents and deputies formed a line, stepping into the woods like soldiers crossing a battlefield. Reeves walked near the center, shotgun slung across his chest, though he wasn't sure a weapon would help against what he felt here. The air inside was cooler, stiller. Every snap of a twig echoed too loud. They moved slowly, scanning the ground, flagging anomalies. Within an hour, they found their first one, a ring of stones blackened by old fire, half buried beneath leaves. In the ashes, a jawbone lay brittle and white. "Animal?" one agent asked hopefully. Reeves crouched, brushed soil away. The teeth were too flat, too human. They marked it and moved on. The deeper they went, the stranger the signs became. One clearing held a dozen wooden poles driven into the ground, each carved with spirals and lines like those on the knife. Time had weathered them, but the grooves were unmistakable. Another site revealed a pit. Inside lay bones, countless bones, layered like sediment, some fresh, some crumbling. The smell of rot clung to the soil even after decades. The anthropologist, Dr. Leary, flown in from Dallas, examined the markings with reverence, as though afraid to touch them. "These are not random," she said softly. "This is ritual space." pre-Christian in style, though distorted. I've seen similar sites in rural Europe, fertility cults, blood cults, but this is American. A syncretic thing. Something that grew out of isolation. Reeves felt the woods close tighter around him. He thought of the villagers' empty houses, their neatly set tables. They hadn't vanished at random. They'd prepared. Near dusk, as the search line spread thin, Reeves heard it again. Laughter, high, childish. It drifted through the trees, carried on no wind. "Hold!" Reeves barked. His deputies froze. He tilted his head, listening. The laughter swirled, impossible to place. Then came a voice, low, rough, almost a growl. Words he couldn't understand, syllables curling unnaturally in his ears. Reeves raised his shotgun. "Show yourself." The forest answered with silence. When they regrouped at the edge of the woods, Reeves said nothing, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, back in the church, Crowell reviewed the finds. "We're dealing with an organized belief system," she said. "One that demanded sacrifice." She pinned photos to the corkboard. The fire pits, the poles, the pit of bones. Whatever happened to those 22 villagers, it wasn't random. They were part of this. Willing or not, Reeves sat at the back, staring at the photos. His mind replayed the laughter, the guttural voice, and as he looked at the picture of the carved poles, he realized something chilling. The spirals weren't random designs. They matched perfectly with the way the villagers' homes had been arranged around the church, a pattern, an echo. Hollow Creek itself was a ritual circle. Later, Reeves stood alone outside. The night pressed close, stars veiled by cloud. He lit a cigarette, but the flame barely held. From the woods, faint but clear, came the laughter again. Children, countless children, giggling in the dark. Reeves whispered hoarsely, "God help us." The laughter answered, bright and cruel, as if God had no say here at all. The discovery came from an overlooked place, the attic of the McClary house. Agents had combed it weeks earlier, finding only dust and old trunks. But this time, one deputy pried up a loose board near the chimney. Inside the gap lay a wrapped bundle, a cloth pouch sealed with wax. Crowell brought it straight to the church. Reeves was there when she unwrapped it, laying the contents on the table under a bare bulb. A leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and soft. The first page bore a name in faded ink. Clara McClary, 1956. Reeves's breath caught. He knew the McClary family by name. They'd been among the vanished. Crowell opened to the first entry. The handwriting was delicate but steady. April 2nd, 1956. The nights are long here, but I love the quiet. Thomas says we are lucky to live apart from the world. I believe him. And yet sometimes, when the wind passes through the trees, it feels like voices travel with it. The entries began simply. Descriptions of gardening, Sunday meals, neighbors visiting. Life in Hollow Creek had been ordinary, but slowly, a shift crept in. May 17th. Last night, Margaret Barrett woke screaming. She said she heard children playing outside her window, but when Thomas checked, the yard was empty. The laughter did not stop until dawn. June 3rd. Father O'Leary preached against fear. He told us the devil prowls in lonely places, but the Lord protects us. Still, I saw him trembling when the voices began in the middle of his sermon. June 21st. The children have stopped speaking. All of them. They only laugh. Their parents pretend not to notice. But when I look in their eyes, I do not see children anymore. Only hunger. Crowell read aloud, her voice tightening with each passage. The agents in the room sat silent, rapt. Reeves leaned forward, knuckles white. His pulse hammered as the words sank into him. The later entries grew erratic, ink smudged, sentences broken. July 9th. We are told not to resist, that to resist is worse than death. I do not know who tells us. The voice comes from the earth, from the trees, from our own children's mouths. July 15th. Thomas says it is nearly time. He kissed me tonight and said we would not be afraid. But I saw tears in his eyes. He has carved the spiral into our door, just like the others. He says it is a promise. I think it is a mark of surrender. The final entry filled only half a page. The handwriting shook with haste. July 23rd. They came to every door. They said it is tonight. The children led the way, holding hands, singing. My neighbors followed. Thomas followed. I do not want to go, but I cannot stay. The spiral burns in my eyes even when I close them. It is beautiful. It is terrible. If I do not write again, know that we fed him. Know that we had no choice. The ink trailed off into a smear. Crowell closed the journal slowly. The silence in the church was suffocating. Later, Reeves sat alone with the book, tracing the shaky last lines with his fingertip. We fed him. The words pulsed in his skull like a heartbeat. He imagined Clara, her candle guttering in the dark as she scribbled those final words. Did she walk willingly into the woods that night? Or was she dragged, laughing against her will? Reeves shut the journal, but he felt no relief. Only dread. Because he knew now, the villagers hadn't vanished. They had given themselves, and whatever had taken them was still waiting. The storm broke at dawn. Rain hammered the village, turning paths into rivers of mud. Reeves had just finished his second cup of bitter coffee when a shout came from the cemetery. An agent sprinted into the church, boots dripping. "Sheriff! Agent Crowell! You need to see this." They followed him out into the downpour. The graveyard looked like a battlefield, soil torn, pits yawning open where forensic crews had dug. One of the pits had collapsed in the night, revealing a hollow beneath. Crowell peered into the darkness. "A void," she murmured. The ground-penetrating radar hadn't picked it up. Whatever was down there had been waiting, hidden beneath their feet all along. They rigged floodlights and descended a ladder into the opening. The chamber was larger than Reeves expected, 30 feet across with walls of packed clay. Symbols were carved into the earth itself, spirals upon spirals, interlocking in maddening patterns. At the center stood a stone altar. The surface was blackened with soot and stained dark. Reeves didn't want to guess what had been spilled there. Around the altar, arranged with ritual precision, lay bones. Not scattered, not random, posed. Some were adult, others child-sized. Crowell's face was set, but Reeves saw her hand tighten on the railing. "This isn't just a burial," she said softly. "This is worship." Dr. Leary, the anthropologist, moved reverently around the chamber, her gloved hands tracing the spirals. "These markings," she whispered, "they're older than the village. Older than Miller's Crossing. I've seen similar designs in petroglyphs thousands of years old. Whoever settled here, they tapped into something ancient. Or it tapped into them." Reeves felt sweat on his back, despite the chill air. The spiral carved into the wall behind the altar drew his eyes. It seemed to move, to pull him inward. He blinked hard. It was just dirt, just a carving. And yet his breath came shallow, as though something vast and unseen pressed close. They collected samples, photographed every surface. But the deeper the team worked, the heavier the air became. Agents muttered of headaches, of nausea. One vomited in the corner. Reeves stood guard at the ladder, fighting the urge to climb out and never return. That was when the generator cut out. The floodlights died, plunging the chamber into blackness. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of children laughing. High, gleeful, echoing in the dark. Reeves fumbled for his flashlight, beams slicing across the chamber. The others did the same, white cones of light swinging wildly. The altar was empty. The walls were still, but the laughter had come from inside the chamber, Crowell barked, "Everyone out!" Now they scrambled up the ladder, mud slick beneath their boots. Reeves was the last, his flashlight trembling in his hand. As he climbed, he thought he saw movement at the bottom. A pale figure, child-sized, watching him with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. He blinked, and it was gone. Above ground, agents breathed raggedly in the rain. The generator sputtered back to life, lights flaring again. Crowell's face was pale but composed. "Seal it. No one goes back down until we know what we're dealing with." Reeves said nothing. His gaze stayed fixed on the pit, water rushing into the void. He had seen something down there. He was sure of it. And it had seen him too. That night, Reeves couldn't shake the sound of the laughter. It followed him into his office, into his dreams. When he finally drifted into uneasy sleep, he dreamed of the chamber again. The spirals pulsed, glowing faintly. And in the center, on the altar, lay the blue leather journal. Its pages fluttered in a wind that wasn't there. The final words burned across the open page. "We fed him." Reeves woke with a start, throat raw from screaming. Rain hammered the church roof, drowning the village in white noise. Inside, the command post was unraveling. 2 agents shouted across the room, their voices sharp, cracking with exhaustion. "You didn't log that evidence bag." "I logged it. You're the one who left the latch open." Crowell slammed her hand on the table. "Enough." The room went quiet, but the silence was brittle. Reeves could feel it. Everybody was fraying. Days of sleepless nights, strange discoveries, the whispers no one wanted to admit they heard. Reeves lit another cigarette, ignoring Crowell's glare. Smoke curled toward the rafters. "You all feel it, don't you?" he said finally. His voice was rough, low. "This place doesn't want us here." No one answered, but the way they shifted told him they agreed. Deputy Latham was the first to break openly. Reeves found him outside near the cemetery, pacing in the rain. "They're still here," Latham muttered, eyes darting to the woods. "The villagers. I seen them, Sheriff. Last night." Walking between the trees, Reeves grabbed his shoulder. "You saw shadows." "Nothing more." Latham shook his head violently. "No, faces. I knew some of them. Mrs. Elder, young Jacob Winters. They were smiling like they knew something I didn't." His voice cracked. "They're not gone. They're waiting." Reeves wanted to dismiss it, but he remembered his dream. The villagers standing in the street, eyes glowing, chanting, waiting. That evening, a commotion broke in the church. An agent, Hernandez, stumbled in, soaked and wild-eyed. "I heard them," he gasped. "They were calling my name." From the woods, kids' voices. Another agent snapped, "You're losing it." "We all are." Hernandez drew his pistol, waving it at the corners of the room. "They're out there. You don't hear them? They're out there laughing at us." Crowell moved slowly, hands raised. "Put the weapon down, Agent." But his hand shook violently, finger taut on the trigger. Reeves stepped forward. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered. "Hernandez, look at me. If they're calling you, then don't give them what they want. Don't feed it." The words slipped out before he realized he'd spoken them. Hernandez froze, his gaze locking on Reeves. Slowly, trembling, he lowered the gun. Crowell seized it, jaw tight. The church fell into stunned silence. Later, Crowell cornered Reeves outside. Rain slicked her hair, her eyes hard. "What did you mean by that?" Reeves hesitated. "What?" "Don't feed it." "You said it like you knew what was happening here." Reeves exhaled smoke, buying time. "It's in the journals, in the carvings. We fed him. That's all we've got to go on." Crowell studied him for a long moment. "You're not telling me everything." Reeves met her gaze, but his silence betrayed him. That night, Reeves walked alone through the village. The rain had eased, but mist clung low, swirling around his boots. He passed the Winters house. Its windows were dark, but for an instant he swore he saw a face in the glass. A child, pale and smiling. When he blinked, it was gone. Reeves pressed his palms to his temples. He couldn't tell anymore what was real and what Hollow Creek wanted him to see. But one thought clawed at him relentlessly. If the villagers had been taken, maybe they weren't dead. Maybe they were still here, watching. The storm passed, leaving Hollow Creek sodden and gray. Mud clung to boots, water dripped from eaves, and mist rose off the cemetery like smoke. Crowell ordered a final sweep of the woods. Too many days had passed with nothing but whispers and bones. They needed proof, something concrete. The line of agents advanced between the trees. Reeves trudged near the center, shotgun heavy in his hands. His head ached from lack of sleep, but adrenaline kept him upright. After an hour, a call came from the flank. "We've got something." They converged on a shallow ravine. At the base, hidden beneath ferns, lay the ruins of a shack. The roof sagged, walls leaning, but inside were signs of habitation, blankets laid out, jars of canned food, a rusted lantern still blackened with soot. One agent lifted a tin can. The expiration date read 1999. Crowell frowned. "This is recent." Reeves knelt, running his hand across the blankets. The fabric was damp, but not decayed. Someone had been here. Not decades ago. Days. Then he saw it, pressed into the mud near the doorway, clear as a photograph. A barefoot print. Small, a child's. Still sharp, edges unsoftened by rain. Reeves' breath caught. "They're alive!" The team pressed deeper, following the ravine. They found more signs, a rope swing hanging from a branch, frayed from use, a circle of stones with ashes still warm, and then, carved into a tree, a spiral. Fresh, the bark still bleeding sap. Reeves touched it with trembling fingers. "They're leading us," he whispered. Crowell's face was pale, or luring us. By dusk, the woods grew darker, oppressive. The search line frayed as agents stumbled over roots, nerves snapping taut. That was when the laughter began again. This time, it wasn't distant. It surrounded them, weaving through the trees, high, bright, unmistakably children. Flashlights swung wildly. Agents called out, some with fear, some with fury. Reeves stood frozen. The sound pulled at him, tugging something deep in his chest. He remembered the dream. The villagers walking hand in hand, children leading the way. "Sheriff," Latham hissed. "Do you see that?" Reeves turned. Between the trees, pale figures moved. Dozens. Men, women, children, their faces faint in the mist. They walked slowly, deliberately, as if in procession. Reeves' heart hammered. "It's them!" Crowell barked. "Hold your positions!" Nobody fires, but the figures kept moving, silent now, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The agent's line broke. Some shouted, others fled. Flashlights bobbed, beams scattering like fireflies. Reeves stood rooted, watching the procession vanish deeper into the woods. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Sheriff!" Crowell snapped. But Reeves couldn't stop. Every part of him screamed to follow. The villagers were alive. He could feel it. Somewhere beyond the trees, they were waiting for him. That night, back at the church, the team was in shambles. 2 agents hadn't returned. Radios buzzed with static. Crowell slammed her fist on the table. "We end this tomorrow. We go back in force. If the villagers are alive, we bring them out. If not..." She trailed off. No one asked what she meant. Reeves sat in silence, clothes damp, eyes distant. He still heard the laughter in his ears, still saw the procession. They hadn't looked like victims. They had looked like believers. And Reeves feared what they were believing in. They entered the woods at dawn. Crowell led the way, her face set, flanked by what remained of the FBI team. Floodlights rigged to generators cut through the mist, casting the trees in stark shadows. Shotguns and rifles gleamed wet with dew. Reeves moved among them, silent, his every step heavy with inevitability. He knew where they were going. The villagers had shown him in dreams, in whispers, in glimpses at the edge of the dark, toward the chamber, toward the heart. The path wound deeper than before, through gullies and over ridges where the mist clung thickest. The further they went, the quieter the forest became, until even the birds refused to sing. And then, faint at first, came the laughter. Children, dozens of them, sweet, bright, unnatural. The agents froze, weapons trembling. "Stay together," Crowell barked, but her voice was thin against the rising chorus. Figures appeared between the trees, pale, indistinct at first, then sharper. Men, women, children, the 22nd of Hollow Creek. They moved in single file, barefoot, eyes glowing faintly, their mouths curved into smiles too wide, too knowing. Reeves whispered, "It's them." The villagers stopped. As one, they raised their hands and pointed toward the ridge. At its crest, hidden in shadow, loomed the entrance to the chamber. The procession turned and walked slowly toward it, vanishing into the earth. Crowell lifted her hand. "Follow." The team moved as a unit, weapons raised. Reeves climbed with them, mud slick beneath his boots, heart pounding like a drum. At the entrance, torches burned, fresh, though no one had lit them. Their flames threw spirals of light across the walls. The laughter had stopped. Inside, the chamber glowed with fire. The spirals carved into the clay walls pulsed as though alive, their lines shifting in the flicker. And at the center, upon the altar, the villagers stood in a circle. Their faces were serene. Clara McClary, the woman who had written the journal, stepped forward. Her eyes shone white. "You should not have come," she said, though her lips did not move. The voice filled the chamber, echoing from every wall. Crowell raised her weapon. "Where are the others? What have you done with them?" Clara smiled. "We fed him, and we were remade." The chamber shook. The earth groaned. From the shadows behind the altar, something vast stirred. A shape unfolded, too large for the space, limbs bending wrong, body half seen. Its presence pressed against their minds like a weight, forcing them to their knees. Reeves fought to breathe. His vision swam. The villagers began to chant, "Feed him! Feed him! Feed him!" One agent broke, screaming, firing wildly into the dark. The bullets vanished without sound. Another dropped his weapon and wept, clawing at his own eyes. Crowell shouted orders, but her voice drowned in the chant. Reeves staggered forward, his eyes locked on Clara's. "Why?" he gasped. "Why surrender?" Her smile widened. "Because resistance is worse. Because hunger is endless. Because he was here long before us, and he will be here long after you." The spirals burned on the walls. The chamber filled with heat, with sound, with laughter that was no longer human. Reeves clutched his head, screaming. And then, silence. When Reeves opened his eyes, he was standing alone in the chamber. The villagers were gone. The agents were gone. The altar stood bare. Only the spirals remained, carved deep, pulsing faintly in the dark. Reeves stumbled outside. The forest was quiet, mist curling between the trees. No footprints behind him. No sound of pursuit. Hollow Creek lay silent, as though nothing had ever happened. Reeves fell to his knees, his screams swallowed by the hills. 20 years later, a camera crew returned to Hollow Creek. The houses were collapsed shells now, overgrown with ivy and brambles. Wind pushed through broken windows. Rusted mailboxes leaned at the ends of driveways. Names faded into illegibility. The crew's producer, a woman named Hallie Voss, crouched to brush dust from a milestone marker on the road's edge. The letters were almost erased, but still visible. Hollow Creek, established. 1883. She spoke softly into her microphone. This is all that remains of the village where, in 1984, 22 people vanished without a trace. Law enforcement recovered journals, bones, and strange carvings in the nearby woods, but the official investigation was closed in 2001. The final report declared Hollow Creek abandoned by choice. Her cameraman whispered, "And Reeves?" She nodded. Detective Michael Reeves was last seen in 2001, entering the forest with federal agents. He never came back. No bodies were ever recovered. Only his notebook surfaced a year later, found in a hollow tree. The last line read, "They are still here." The footage cut to local interviews. A rancher spoke of hearing laughter in the trees at dusk. A hunter described torches flickering where no one lived. A child claimed her grandfather had told her never to follow the spirals in the dirt. Some spoke of government cover-ups, others of cults. A few whispered about something older than the village itself, something buried that had been unearthed, then fed. None could explain the dreams. Whole families described the same visions, children singing in the fog, a red glow pulsing deep in the pines, a man with no face reaching out his hand. The documentary ended at nightfall. The crew gathered on the ridge above the ruins. The forest below was silent. Hallie turned to the camera, her face pale in the glow of the floodlights. "There is nothing left of Hollow Creek," she said quietly. "And yet, sometimes it feels like the village never left us at all." The floodlights flickered. For a heartbeat, the microphones caught a faint sound. Children laughing. And then the screen went black.